Hello folks, and welcome back to part 2 of our Be Quiet case mod. Now you may be wondering, how on earth are we at part 2 when we haven't even had a proper part 1? Well, interestingly enough, because this case until today was under NDA, we couldn't really show it. So instead we modded this GPU instead, and that's going to be taking pride and place inside the case itself. But what we can do now is go through exactly what we're going to be doing and also have a closer look at the Purebase 500, which you may remember from our Computex footage back in May. So let's take a look at all this gear that we've been sent and how we're going to be using it. So this is going to be quite an interesting little project because Be Quiet has decided to go against the grain and make it an anti-RGB build. So we're not going to be filling this with argy-bargy fancy lights. Instead, we're going old school and using classic color theming. In this case, we're going with black and white monochrome. Okay, maybe it's not going to be strictly monochrome because I'm going to be adding a few little bits of mirror in between, some silver perhaps, just to break it up a little bit, but primarily it's going to be those two colors. Now to fit that, Be Quiet has sent a bunch of stuff that we're going to be using. So obviously you can see we've got a bunch of different cables here, which are going to be replacing the stock ones on the power supply, which is a straight power 11 that they've sent. This is the 750 watt version. We've also got a ton of different fans because this is also going to be an air-cooled build, no water cooling, which is a little bit different to what we normally do. To that extent, they've also sent this beastly cooler, which is the Dark Rock Pro 4. Now this thing is completely black and it should be really quite interesting and has some modding opportunities on it as well. And I haven't really done a whole lot with air coolers. We did a previous one a while back, but most of the time we do water cooling, so this should be quite exciting. HyperX is also going to be supplying the memory and SSD for this build, and we've got a Gigabyte X570 Gaming X motherboard going in, which should fit nicely, especially when paired with an AMD 3700X. So it's going to be quite a beefy system, but at the same time in keeping with the case itself. So taking a look at the case itself, there are quite a few different opportunities that I like to try and exploit, namely this particular pattern here. So this triangular one that they've chosen for all the vents, I think is really interesting. So most of the time you find a hexagonal sort of honeycomb mesh on most cases, and this one is really quite different. So for that reason, I'd like to try working it into some of the features. So one of the things I'd like to try doing is maybe swapping out the actual power supply shroud here, which looks really nice, but maybe for added contrast, I'd like to try making that a matte black. And then on top of it, or underneath, depending which looks better, I want to put a mirrored acrylic panel. Now the thing is, we're not going to be able to do like a vertical GPU arrangement on this case. So what I'd like to do is have it so that the bottom of the GPU can still be seen, or at least alluded to via the use of mirrors. Now I can put one at the bottom here, and I can also put one at the top, because then that will reflect the cooler and hopefully provide a little bit more of an interesting aspect in, because we don't have a lot of lights this time, remember, so we have to use light in a slightly different way. Now another thing I was thinking about doing was making a grate that goes along the front here. So to do that, I'd like to make a 3D printed model that has a sort of a sweeping curve and has all these triangles built into it. That way, we still have a lot of airflow coming from the front, because after all this is an air-cooled build, so it does need to be a fair priority that, but also it kind of ties it into the whole theming, and then maybe I'll add some blanking plates made out of matte black acrylic. Again, keeping it fairly simple, we just want to make it look really nice, right? That's the goal of this one. But not everything has to be simple. So this is the default glass panel that comes with this case. Now I actually really like this panel because it doesn't have any tinting. So manufacturers, take note, tinted glass is not good for case modding because you can't see anything. So thank you, Be Quiet, for not doing it. Only I don't really need to use this one because the problem with tempered glass is, of course, you can't do anything to it once it's done, aside from maybe a little bit of chemical etching. So what we're going to be doing is replacing this with an acrylic panel and maybe taking a slightly different direction with it by making an Apple-style cheese grater vent. But instead of using the circles like Apple uses, we're going to be using the same triangles that are found over here, and I want to have it along this side here. Now that will stick in front of the 3D printed grate and should all match up nicely, and then I'll have a big cutout here so that the cooler is incredibly visible, and of course that's going to add even more airflow, but really it's just for looks. Now additionally, I'd like to maybe turn my eyes towards some of the internal components, much like we did with the GPU in the last video. Now what we've done is we've matched it all up with the color of the case and the theme of the entire build. So maybe doing that with some of the other parts like the motherboard or other individual components, maybe doing some vinyl decal work, highlights, accent pieces, that sort of thing would be quite interesting to try and tie it all into the theme. Now, of course, the meat of this build is all going to be done in the next part. This is just the introduction. So make sure you stay tuned and don't miss that. And the best way to do that is to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. So make sure you do that. And of course, you can also find us over on Discord, builds.gg, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I'll catch you next time, folks.